All right, and we are underway. And folks will just catch up as they jump in. Thanks for joining tonight on kind of a quick catch-up version using some recent polls that we've gotten. Spent a lot of time in some of these districts that we're going to touch on that we've been talking about for a while that have led to some small adjustments in the models and not big deals, but further tightening of the cone of uncertainty. That generally still pretty good news for Democrats, but there is a little bit of tightening. So I'm going to share a screen here, and then we will get underway. There we go. And I'm also going to show you guys some mailings that have gone out that I've been helping with in a variety of ways and trying to help fund as well. And those of you who have been able to give, thank you very much. That money is being used to help a lot of these candidates with some final mailings over the last week or so. And I think you'll enjoy some of them. And they really get at the whole cost issue that remains a dominant factor for those that are undecided. So here we are, version 3.0. So just some headlines real quick. Democratic down ballot prospects remain strong. They're slightly lower than at the beginning of the month with version 2.0, which was about 4 weeks ago. Harris appears to be stable in a range slightly better than Biden 2020. And the gubernatorial race is remarkably stable, consistently showing within a point or two, Ayotte with a small but durable lead, but at the top of margin of error. And one thing, and any of you have been overwhelmed by TV ads in New Hampshire probably have seen this. The Republican messaging has moved significantly since the primary ended, from an anti-Manchester, very Joyce Craig has failed as mayor type message to much more of a tax and spend set of scare tactics. We've seen that in the direct mail, digital ads, down ballot, and they've largely moved to that kind of message against Joyce in the gubernatorial race. So just as a reminder, a couple numbers, you'll see the partisan voter index measures how much more or less, much more Democratic or Republican a given district is than the state overall in statewide elections in recent years. The baseline entering the cycle was 48.64. That number has changed as we've gotten polling that gives us an idea about what the political environment is likely to look like this fall. Here's what it is. The projected PVI has improved dramatically since the beginning of the cycle. Entering the cycle, like I said, 48.64. The first version of the projections actually had it lower at a little above 48% Democratic performance, 48% of the two-party vote. Those of you that watched on October 5th may have seen that the new projections were much better, over 3 points better for Democrats at 51.5% about. And tonight's projection is slightly lower. It's 51.28. It's about a quarter point lower than the one at the beginning of the month. That's still a strong number. It would be the best Democratic baseline performance for statewide candidates in New Hampshire since 2014. And 2014 was a bad night nationally for Democrats, but it was a pretty good night in New Hampshire for Democrats when Jeanne Shaheen survived a strong challenge against Scott Brown. Maggie Hassan survived a strong challenge for a second term for governor, and that made New Hampshire one of the best states in the country for Democrats on election night. That is the power of the top of the ticket. So what we find is if the current number, the 51.28, if that holds, districts as red as R 1.3 would actually perform like Democratic districts. That is to say, if everything was perfectly neutral, we'd be winning most of the seats right out of the chute up to R 1.3. That's a little lower than in early October. Here's the good news. There are about 191 seats that if the current model, if the election were today and it looked just like the model, the baseline would be around 191 seats even before we got into some of the specific characteristics of candidates. That's a much stronger position than 2 years ago when we won 197, but only had 158 working in our favor. We overperformed. This one, we'd be much closer to the majority, and then we have an excellent operation. So what's been going on with the polls? Well, frankly, not that much. These are most of the polls that have taken place since the primary. And you can see at the presidential level, generally remarkably stable. And Harris generally in the low 50s, Trump generally around 44, with about 5% undecided. This, if holds, would be somewhat better than how Biden did. But you can see, with the exception of the Emerson poll here, most of these polls are remarkably stable. But the gubernatorial polls have been even more stable. Look at this. Generally speaking, Kelly is about 3 points ahead of Joyce, 2.5 to 3 points ahead. But all of these are within the margin of error. We have one poll that Joyce has been ahead by a point, the UNH poll. I expect another UNH poll later this week, and we're going to keep a close eye. As these things move, it affects the model. But there hasn't been a ton of change this month in the model, as you could see, because there hasn't been a lot of change that we can measure in the political environment. So here's the nitty gritty. In the best reasonable case scenario, the 80th percentile, what we call it, you can see in version 1.0 in late August, then 2.0 in early October, and now the current one in today. You can see very little change. The ceiling is a little bit lower than it was at the beginning of the month, not a lot. You can see it only has an impact of a handful of seats in the House in the best case scenario. Generally, those are the ones in the reddest districts. This, again, is not what is the most likely thing to happen, but it gives you an idea what the ceiling is if Harris and Craig perform at the top of what is possible. This is of the two-party vote. So you can see they're down a little bit from the prior version based on the model, but not very much. This is the most likely type scenario we're looking at today. We're down from 217 to 213 in House seats in the model, and remain right about at 12 Senate seats. In the model, we retain all 10 Democratic seats that we hold right now, and then win about two, mainly between Matt McLaughlin, Ben Ming. They're the two most likely. Rusty Talbot and Stu Green are in that mix as well. In this scenario, we probably win 2 of those 4 races. They're really close. Could be 1, could be 3, but the model shows in most scenarios, we win about 12 seats. This is the worst reasonable case. You can see no change. There's really no evidence of degradation that should cause a lot of concern on the low end. And so we remain in a place to be around 190, 188 to be exact in this iteration of the model. And we hold the seats that we have and maybe pick off another. So the worst case scenario is not what we want, but it's hardly a disaster. And as you can see, there's no real change there. So as a couple reminders, Joyce and her performance matters more than Kamala Harris's does in these projections, because the governor's race has more direct impact down ballot than the presidential. And there's been virtually no change in the gubernatorial. Things could change this week. There's a lot of polls coming out starting tomorrow, but the range of outcomes are going to tighten around the median by the weekend, unless there's some significant changes in the polling, which at the moment I don't anticipate, but we'll see. And then Monday, a final projection, which becomes basically a prediction, will come out, and we'll roll that one out on Monday. Very quickly, a handful of seats that I want to mention. Let me go back a second. These are the seats that, as of this moment, are probably the closest to bellwether. They're the ones that are going to be on the razor's edge. We'll have a final list next Monday. These are the seats that are going to be hugging the line of what we win or don't win, and will probably determine whether we get a majority with a little room to breathe, or we get it with a fair amount of room to breathe. These are the ones right near the line by county. So you can see there's a couple in Cheshire County, that are going to be extremely close and predictive. We have Berlin. I spent the evening in Berlin last Wednesday and spent a lot of time talking with folks up in Coas. This seat has been in the bullseye the whole time. I added this one. This is the only district I've added this time, and it's the other Berlin-based seat. This is the all Berlin seat, 2 seats, and it's some wobbliness. There's a very strong Republican running. He's the county sheriff. And so this one, the model shows that small differences at the top could be the difference in whether or not we win both seats or we win only 1 seat. So I put this one onto the list and one that we should watch next Tuesday. This one, getting the 2nd seat in Grafton County, Rusty Talbot's chances of winning that Senate seat hinge in no small part upon performing well in these set of towns. This is a seat to flip in Grafton. Have to do it to get the majority. You can see it's an R about 1.8. It's going to act like a very neutral seat next week if these polls hold up. Carolyn lost by 4 votes last time, extremely neutral. And the model shows anything up to about an R 1.3 would be acting like a Democratic seat. This one is going to be as close to 0 as you're going to get in the state of New Hampshire. Extra seats in the town of Merrimack. We put some money in. I'm going to show you a mail piece that they're doing. We're going to win 3, could win 4, even 5. Little changes, big difference here. One we're going to watch next week. The Manchester seats are going to matter a lot. We won't get too much into them. This is one where we had big time incumbent power that has, they have both retired. And so this is one that I'll be watching very closely next Tuesday. Goffstown, I'll show you a mail piece from there, put some good money into that one. They're doing a great job. Good example of a suburban district that is going to be on the razor's edge. And then this one, yet another one, we have a mail piece to show you tonight, putting money into that one. And this one, Keith Ammon won by only 8 votes in 2022. And we have a real chance of picking off 1 and maybe even 2 seats in this district. Great example. It's a microcosm of a lot of kind of seats like it in New Hampshire. Milford has gotten kind of interesting. We should be good for a couple seats there, but this is one where Ayotte is going to, I'm sure, try to maximize performance. If she is successful in that, it would have a negative impact in Milford, but this is one that we got to watch pretty closely. And then Hollis and the towns around it. This seat is very much acting like a +0 seat in the current environment. And right now, I think Karen is more likely to win than not. But if the model floats too much downward, this seat gets very interesting very quickly. Rockingham County. This one reminds me a little bit of that New Boston-based district. Similar, 3-seat district, moving towards Democrats. We have an incumbent in this one. We have a real chance to pick off at least 1 other seat. And I'm bullish on that. And then we have a handful in Stratford. Spent some time with the Stratford County Democrats over the last few weeks. Here's one, feel really good about holding the 2 incumbents. Have a shot with Adam Mulholland, and this is one where there's a Republican that we'd really like to defeat. And so that 3rd seat is going to be very interesting in what should be a very neutral district. Anything in the R 1.5 to R +2 in the current environment is extremely, exceptionally competitive in the current model. And then Rochester. Was in Rochester over the weekend, trying to get resources in there. And Chuck tied last time. His district, again, look at that PVI number. It's very much in that zone of its bellwether for the entire state. Amy Malone, that district's even a little friendlier. This is one that we probably have to win if we're going to be having a good night, because it should be acting like a Democratic seat next Tuesday under the current model. And then here's a floterial seat in Rochester. We have a real chance to pick off at least 1 additional seat here. And again, it's a competitive seat, and Rochester's a priority. And finally, in Sullivan County, I was there last Friday night, and Jenny Ramsey, I think, is one of our best new candidates that the House has put forward this cycle. It's an extremely competitive seat. She's raised tremendous amount of money, worked very hard. and is a local elected official. These are all very good indicators. And if we find that we are successful in this one, particularly if we do it with a little room to spare, it's a pretty good sign about some other districts in that part of the state as well. Just as a reminder, 4 state Senate seats I mentioned, these are the ones that determine whether we get 10, 11, 12, or 13 in all likelihood. Matt McLaughlin, probably our best chance to flip a seat. That's a Bedford seat, goes all the way out to the Vermont border. Then there is Stu Green, who's really come on as a first-time candidate. Military background, gun owner, speaks the language well with authenticity in a district that matches up very well with that. This one models as an extremely close race. Then we've got Ben Ming. Spent some time with Ben last week. This is always a close seat. You can see last time it was a 2.5 point race. That's what we're looking at this time. And this is where small changes in the model determine whether or not we win or not, because it's going to be a super close race. And then I mentioned Rusty Talbot up in District 1, the North Country. If we are doing well in the northern Grafton County, part of this district, which is almost half of the district, and if we're saving our Berlin state rep candidates, if they are surviving and winning those seats, that's a pretty good indication that Rusty is competing as well, because these are all going to act in a similar fashion. Now, I wanted to show, let me get this back here. Let's see. I wanted to show some of the mail pieces that candidates and districts that I've been spending time in are doing. If you've watched some of the prior live streams, cost. Low engagement Democrats who may well determine how well we and the national Democrats do, they are much more focused on cost of groceries, rent, heating, gasoline, healthcare, you name it, education, cost, and immigration. High engagement Democrats, kind of folks that are on this call tonight, much more prioritizing abortion, environment, LGBTQ, equality, and so forth, democracy. So here's one from the town of Merrimack. They wanted to communicate in a final mail piece. Two of our excellent incumbents wanted to communicate that cost matters and got pretty explicit with it. Keeping your cost low takes leadership, and then made a bunch of arguments as to how they can help bring costs down. That has the trickle-down effect of lowering local property taxes. When it comes to budgets, yours is the most important. I really like that language. It's very explicit. We're talking about cost, and that was one example in the town of Merrimack. And we can go back to that after if we do some Q&A. Melanie Levesque, spent time with Melanie last week. Had the ability to do some digital advertising down the stretch. I got a screenshot of the front, or rather of the digital ad. Sorry that it's cut off a little. And more than anybody, Melanie said, okay, I'm going to get right in there. People are disproportionately concerned about groceries. I'm going to say it. I'll fight to make sure you can afford your groceries. Costs are skyrocketing. Again, I like how explicit the message is here. Here's a fun one. And I give Nicole Bump, who is a superstar in Goffstown, one of the most important districts in the state. I took a couple of screenshots of the front and back. Nicole and I were talking about how eggs have become the metric for whether or not your economy, your personal economy, is doing well. And if you were a chicken, you could win any election. So she took those ideas and put them to life, animated them. You may have trouble reading it. Cost of eggs got you down. We're not going to lie. Your state reps can't really lower the cost of eggs unless you elect this gal, and there's the chicken. And then the chicken is saying, my clucking taxes are through the roost. Good use of humor, but they can put money back in your pocket. So in the back, you see a quick explanation. The GOP keeps cutting the sources that can lower local property taxes. Oh, yes, Katie in Bedford asks, was that Jen in Merrimack? Yes, Jen Jobin, who is the vice chair of the Merrimack Town Democratic Committee and a wonderful graphic artist professionally, we were talking with her about this, and Heather Robitaille, and they came up with some really good language, and the other side of it as well, the graphics on the other side of that Merrimack piece. This one is Goffstown, and you can see the back. The GOP keeps cutting state revenue sources that could have been used to reduce our property taxes. And then the chicken in the back says, "Vote for my peeps, Tuesday, November 5th." Very witty. So we really like the explicit nature of this. Just say the quiet part out loud. There's one other one I want to mention that's not about cost. It is about a vulnerable incumbent in District 42 in Hillsborough County. Spent a lot of time thinking this one through, was able to get some funding to help get this one produced and out the door. And you can see Keith Ammon, who is a hardcore free stater, is not mainstream. Be direct in the mail. And here's a tweet from him in July of this year, July 17th, where he talks about, "I was one of 3 state reps who are part of Heritage Foundation's State Legislative Advisory Council. We discussed Project 2025 months ago. It's a brilliant way to jumpstart the policy agenda in DC on day one. Consider adding your resume, project2025.org. That is Keith Ammon's tweet. He owns it. I'll be honest. In July, it was not clear in polling that Project 2025 was yet well known enough yet to be able to be sent to somebody's home and have anybody know what the heck they were talking about. Well, that has changed. And so this was an opportunity to really highlight it in his own words, which is often the most powerful. Keith Ammon is running for them, not our community. And here's the back of it. We are mainstream and know our job is to bring your values and concerns to Concord. And you can see bringing property tax relief, bullet point number 1, again, bringing it back. And then I like at the very bottom, the New Boston district has 3 seats to fill. Vote for all 3 candidates. Those of you that have been watching this for a while know that in the multi-seat House districts, there's often drop off because people aren't comfortable. They're not sure that they're supposed to vote for more than one state rep candidate, even in a multi-seat district. So they often leave the others blank. So it is good in a mail piece like this to just mention it again. You can never over-educate. Oh, here we go. Yeah, in a second here, there's another mail piece. Let me look at this real quick here. Oh yeah, Adam Finkel, who's knows everything going on in the North Country, including in that Senate district. There's some crazy, nasty mail being used, sent out by the New Hampshire GOP in that state Senate race up there. So in a moment, Adam, we'll highlight that. See if there's anything else here. Yeah, so I want to do a quick overview, slight changes in the model, slight changes in the projections. And then I love some of the mail that's been coming out in the last week or two. Really proud that the PAC's been able to help collaborate with these and help fund them. There's still some last minute digital opportunity to help for candidates in some of these swing districts where we can help shape that and fund some of that. And that's certainly something that you can email me through the website anytime. Go to movethegoalpostnh.com. There it is. And you can email me through there if your district is in a position for some kind of last second need. It would probably be digital at this point. So let me stop sharing the screen and come back here. Adam, maybe you can take a moment and talk a little bit about the nature of the negative mail pieces that are going on in that Senate district open seat where Rusty Talbot is scaring the heck out of him up there.
Yeah, thanks. My audible? Yeah, I sound like I am.
Yes.
Yeah, so this is one side of a 2-sided flyer, the third of 3. The first one was Rusty's a carpetbagger because his brother and he apparently inherited a vineyard in California that he never goes to. And he had a Twitter account that says, "I live in Washington," but it wasn't used for the last 15 years. So pretty lame. But the second one was worse. And the third one, as you can see, is even worse. And frankly, I was neutral on this. Dave Rochford has been hugely helpful to us up north on the landfill and the solid waste and the DES reform issues. And I think he could bring us a couple of Republican votes. But I'm surprised at how many letters there have been in the local papers about where's Dave? Why is he not speaking out against his party, who's lying about Rusty and fear mongering in the worst way. So I've switched my allegiance. Rusty's going to come to our state park briefly on Thursday, and I think it's having an effect. I mean, I think about what happened to Colin Van Osteren. He was somehow in a race that had negative activity on both sides. He got painted as the bully and plummeted. So frankly, I'm hoping that happens to Dave.
Thanks, Adam. Yeah, that is one of the ways you know that a candidate is getting traction is when the other side starts spending real money, going negative on them. Because if they don't think they're much of a threat, there's a lot of places you could spend the money. So they have done this on multiple occasions. And Rusty, I probably spent as much time with Rusty as any state Senate candidate. And it's a tougher district than say Matt McLaughlin or Ben Mings on paper, and maybe even a little more than Stu Green's. But I got to say, Rusty is one of the best first-time candidates in the state, certainly that I've spent time with this cycle. And obviously, I believe strongly he deserves the full support needed to take him as high up as we can get him, and hopefully get him a victory a week from tomorrow. So they're going after him. Katie, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, I just want to say, Steve, to your point, I do think that when they feel threatened, they're going on the attack. And Adam, to like jump on board what you're saying, I just think all this negativity by the Republicans is a losing game. I think that people are tired of it. They're tired of the negativity, especially when it's, excuse the term, trumped up. The higher taxes, the ugliness of that mailer and some of the other Republican mailers. It's one thing when we as Democrats put out a mailer or do a letter to the editor, we're actually quoting votes on legislation to point to. But I just think both sides are just tired of like the ugliness. So, just want to say that.
It's always risky when you go negative. It's what they're hoping is that Rusty, as a first-time candidate who is not well known, or certainly entering the race was not well known in Coos County, that if they can define him before Rusty can define himself, that's obviously the idea. It's a race to define the other person first. Rochefort has the benefit, marginally anyway, of being a sitting state rep that, at least in his area, the greater Littleton area, that provides some benefit. Rusty has done a lot of stuff in that area as well. But neither of them are primarily a Coos-based candidate. And it was very interesting being in Berlin on Wednesday night and spending time talking to folks. I felt like being up there, Rusty, to some extent, even in a Democratic dinner, it was a Coos County Democratic fall dinner, there were still people there that were getting to know who Rusty was for the first time. It's part of the challenge of having a state Senate district that is, for example, as big as Rhode Island and Delaware combined. It's an enormous district, although without very many population centers. So it makes mail arguably more important than most state Senate districts, because it's harder to get a critical mass of door knocking going, among other things. I see a question here about Bill Marsh's race. I did not mention Bill a whole lot today. If Joyce, and we're going to see some polls starting tomorrow, end of the race polls here, if we see Joyce further increasing her share of the vote above that sort of 44%, down 47, 44 kind of static standing that we were seeing here, then Bill's race gets very interesting. That's an example, because of the nature of the district, where Bill really needs Joyce, and to a lesser extent Harris, to win, because the district's a little redder than some of the other ones we've mentioned. On the other hand, Bill is really well known, has unique cross-party appeal opportunity. I know he's worked his butt off. So Bill, I think, is putting himself in a position where, if the top of the ticket approaches closer to the 80th percentile that I showed you in the model earlier, then Bill's Bill's put himself in a position to win that race if he gets the help he needs at the top of the ticket. To some extent, all of the state Senate candidates, Bill and the four that I had just mentioned a moment ago, all of them need a little bit of help because none of them are Democratic leaning districts. However, in the current model, they don't really need McLaughlin, Ming, and maybe Green don't need a lot more help than the median projection right now to have a real chance to win. Rusty probably needs it to be a little better than the median projection. Bill probably needs it to be closer to the 80th percentile projection, given the environment in which they're running. But look, we're trying to get to 13, and you got to have more than 13 targets to win 13 races typically. And I feel like we got 15 legit targets. And if Joyce moves up this week in the polling, you'll see in the final model next Monday, real projections for that. A lot of polls coming out. We'll have some new data. Let's see here. I promised not to take too long tonight, and we're at about 35 minutes, which is a sprint in my world usually. Any other questions or comments that folks have? I'll give people a chance here. Hoping to have some short videos out. This will be recorded and put on the YouTube channel before I go to bed tonight. And I think that keep a close eye on the polls. Working on some things to make some stops around the state this weekend in some of these key districts. Going to try to drum up volunteers that are able to do some canvassing, some GOTV, door to door, and so forth in selected districts. If you are in as a candidate or an activist, if you are in a purple district, a really competitive district, and you would be interested, if I'm able to put together one of these statewide volunteer opportunities for the weekend, send me an email, again, through the website, movethegoalpostnh.com. And as that comes together, then, I'll try to incorporate these highest priority districts. A question here, what do you think could make the difference for Joyce in these final days? Thanks, Lori. Here's the short answer. The party, Joyce's campaign, the Democratic Governors Association, has done a good job of making Kelly Ayotte fireable. She is the incumbent, really, in this race. Better known, better funded, former statewide elected official. Her disapproval was in the 30s at the beginning of this exercise. It's now around 50. There are now enough voters out there willing to fire Kelly that Joyce can win. So to answer the question, what we need, and this is what we can all do in our communication to voters, we need to make sure that Joyce is hireable. There are enough voters out there willing to not have Kelly win, but we need to do better than simply say, Trump is lousy, Kelly is lousy, vote for us. To get from 45% up to winning in the governor's race, we need to get that last 3 to 5% of people who are willing to say, actually, I want Joyce to win, not just I don't like Kelly that much. So communicating the strengths of Joyce, her accomplishments in housing, job creation, 40% reduction in violent crime, the fact that Manchester is the biggest and most complex city in the state and is the best practice to become governor, far more than being a U.S. senator. Make the positive case for Joyce at every opportunity, because when Joyce does better, everybody's going to do better. And that's probably my take on that. Let's see. Question about executive council. Short answer. Obviously, there's the one blue seat in the western part of the state. That's a gimme, Karen Leon Hill. That leaves 4 all Republican-leaning districts. It is critically important, again, if Joyce is doing well, all of those districts theoretically come into play. I think that John Morgan is an example of a candidate who is doing a lot of the things you would do to be successful. It's a marginally more difficult district, for example, than Melanie Levesque's district. Melanie I expect that race to be pretty close. The national one that goes out west. Emmett needs Joyce to do pretty well. To exceed expectations, frankly, in the North Country. If Rusty is doing well, it probably means Emmett is doing well. These things are all directly related. John Stephen is probably the toughest of the Republican candidates as a match for the district. And so the Manchester-based district, I think Jim O'Connell's a great guy and is putting real effort in. John Stephen is a tough matchup. So if Joyce is doing well, these other executive council races come into play, but they are directly tied to Joyce's performance. Let's see here. The signs around here for AOT say Joyce Craig will raise your taxes. What do you suggest as a counterpoint? Well, here's what I would say to, and actually, there's an ad that I worked with the Hanover Democrats on that they're putting in a number of they're putting in publications up there. And it basically, we need to get voters to think about taxes more like this. Republicans have had the trifecta the last 4 years. They've had the governor, they've had the state Senate, they've had the state House, they've had the executive council. Ask yourself, the last 4 years, are your property taxes going up or are they going down? Under Republican leadership at every level the last 4 years, as it relates to the number one tax most of us pay at the state or local level, are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? And if you're not, and you're not, then it's time for a change. These folks aren't looking out for you on the number one tax that we pay below the federal level. So we need to flip it around. It's not Joyce Craig that'll raise your taxes. It's the Republican leadership of the last 4 years that's had an opportunity to do something about the dominant tax we pay, and they have failed. If your taxes have gone down in the last 4 years, your property taxes, then you should totally vote for Kelly Ayotte. And if your local property taxes have gone up in the last 4 years, you need to fire Republicans because they have failed at one of the most important jobs they have. We got to play offense on taxes, and we can. There was a question about, oh yeah, weekend events. I think, Katie, and that may be what your hand is up for.
Actually, my hand is up to say I was very disappointed 2 weekends ago when the first GOTV packets came out for canvassing to see that Joyce Craig was regulated to a 1.5 inch by 3 inch little box on the Harris door hanger, given the tightness of that race. And so I made a lot of noise about it, and then I got Joyce lit for my packets. I'm just curious as to whether in the communities of the audience here, are you guys seeing Joyce lit in your packets? But I've also ran out of Joyce lit in my packets, which means this final weekend, I don't know if I'm going to get more or not. So I just thought it was a little alarming because we need Joyce to win, as Steve states, and just kind of taking an official poll, if you will.
Yeah, anybody else? Is there anybody else who's had a similar experience, or are you getting a lot of Joyce's lit in your packets?
Our Joyce Craig packets were the lit for Joyce Craig was pulled this last weekend in Sunapee.
That's just
right.
Here, I'll make some more noise about it.
Oh yeah, and look, I can't say it enough. If you care about your executive council, state Senate, state House, and county races, you are rooting for Joyce as much as Joyce is rooting for Joyce. Her success is our success, and as I've told gubernatorial candidates in the last several cycles, even if you are in a primary like Joyce and Cindy were this summer, you have to think of yourself as the quarterback of the team. You have to run, even if you have a primary, you have to run for governor almost like you are the governor, because you're going to have that impact on the ticket. So you have to be integrated up and down the ticket from the moment you get into the race. It's not just good politics for winning, especially if you have a primary. That's how you're going to win in November. You're all a team. And if Joyce wins, but she doesn't get the majorities in the House, Senate, and or executive council, then her best day is going to be vetoing crappy ideas. And I don't think that's why Joyce has spent the last year and a half of her life, you know, putting it all on the line so that she could veto crappy ideas. I think she would like to get important work positively done. Yes, Katie, one other thing, I saw your note here in the chat. What do you mean by the weekend events exactly? So basically, I've got a great email list, and folks have been really generous with their money and over the course of the last year plus. And the number one thing I'm hearing from candidates and local committees now is, hey, that's great, but at this point, most of the money that I would need either is in the door or it didn't get in the door, with a few exceptions, mainly some digital stuff. And so they're like, what I really could use is more bodies. I could use more people to help knock on doors right up to election day, including election day. And so one of the things that I'd like to pivot to is over the course of, I'll start as early as the end of this work week, is to have opportunities, particularly in relatively competitive districts, to where if there are scheduled canvases where I'm able to help direct people from my email list and say, look, this is what folks need. And we tried that in Rochester. One of the challenges with picking one location on one day is, of course, the email list is 99% New Hampshireites, but of course, most people don't live within a half hour of any one location. So being able to put together a number of locations so that somebody that lives in the greater Keene area, you know, being made aware that, you know, District 17 is one of the most important House districts in the state right outside of Keene, they have that option without having to drive 2 hours to get to a specific place, all the way to Coos County. I mean, in every part of the state, we've got races that would qualify. So to the extent, especially if you're involved in local or county Democratic committees, that you have a district that clearly is in the bullseye here, and you know of canvassing that you've got going on at certain dates starting later this week and certainly through the weekend and next Monday, if you could let me know, and I can't promise yet how many people, what kind of response, but I think there's an opportunity to present that and be able to get a response back and hopefully get additional volunteers in the places that matter most. That's the idea. So I'll have more on that, but that's a more descriptive idea of what I was referring to. Let's see here. I see 4 new messages. Let me just check this really quick here. Let's see. Okay. We're around the 45-minute mark. So what I would urge is if send me an email through the website if you do have opportunities late this week, this weekend, up to election day, where volunteer help would make a real difference. And I will see what I can do to direct volunteers to those places, and obviously open to suggestions. I'm on the road as well, and we'll try to be as helpful as I can over the weekend and Monday. So if you've got things going on and you could use a hand, I'm going to try to stitch that and put some miles on my car in the purple places of New Hampshire. So anyway, we'll get this up, share this once it's up on YouTube. Get a hold of me anytime if you have any needs, last minute financial needs for digital, volunteer opportunities, you name it. And then next Monday, we'll have a final projection with hard numbers. And I hope they're as accurate as they were last time. But let's look at the polls this week. It's going to tell us a lot about how stable this race is. Okay, and with that, we will call it. And I thank you guys for taking the time today. Appreciate it.
Thank you.